let me go back to the number one concern of the Global Risk Report: disinformation and misinformation. Tackling this has been our focus since the very beginning of my mandate. With our Digital Services Act, we defined the responsibilities of large internet platforms on the content they promote and propagate, responsible to children and vulnerable groups targeted by hate speech.
Fukuyama's claim that we're at the end of history, preceded, it was after the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it's assumed, oh, right, these two great ideological monoliths are now longer battling because there ain't going to be a communist future. Capitalism has won the day. But it seems with the advent of the kind of technological power that we're utilizing right now, and sometimes, like, for example, a minute ago, I was watching John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs explaining what the connection is between the Cheneys and Kamala Harris, and it's like it would make sense that they would find affiliation, and talked about like Victoria Nuland. I thought, my God, what a miracle it is that we have this kind of independent media. And often when I'm like looking at your Substack and reading your articles that I'm a subscriber to, I feel like, yeah, new media sources give me access to information that I wouldn't otherwise have, and in a way that was impossible before. One of the common laments about online spaces, in particular Instagram, TikTok and all that, is it's reducing our attention spans. It's bombarding us with the sort of like bite-sized soundbite economy of mind. But the reverse is true, you know, like sort of because of like Joe Rogan and his many imitators, we have long-form conversations where it's like possible to learn a whole bunch about archaeology or nutrition or whatever. But when it comes to the subject of free speech, it's easy to see how vast, sprawling, heavily funded bureaucracies like the EU or military alliances like NATO, alongside a compliant global legacy media and a cuckolded democratic system in countries like yours and mine, could lead to a kind of end of history, a kind of stasis, a book burning, a end of opposition. Indeed, wasn't the pandemic a kind of rehearsal for the kind of airport future that they see for us, where everything is anodyne, sanitized and controlled? What do you reckon about all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because, of course, you're referencing this famous book, The End of History, where he says, you know, after the end of the Cold War, there's going to be no more kind of major civilizational geopolitical conflicts. That lasted a few years, and then you had 9/11 and all these wars in the Middle East and, you know, just awfulness, suggesting that, in fact, there are fundamental, you know, different views for people that are pro-liberal democratic Western civilization, people that really hate it and want to tear it down. And that many of those people live in our societies, that many of the people trying to undermine the basis of civilization are here. The people attacking free speech are in our countries. And, you know, they as you say, they come to our events. And I think it's important to understand, yeah, it's helpful to put it in context, and in the context of history. I mentioned before that, you know, this fight for free speech, you know, it has wins and losses. It goes back and forth between the totalitarians. I also read this incredible history recently that describes totalitarianism. He says that the most defining part of totalitarianism is the hunt and attack on heretics. And it's brilliant. And I think it's you know, so obviously he's reduced the argument, he's simplified totalitarianism, but he says that's at the core of it. And you see it, right? So he starts with the Inquisition, and he goes through, all of it, all the totalitarian movements, the most famous of which, of course, are Nazism and communism. You put that together with this other brilliant book by someone named James Burnham, who wrote a book called The Managerial Revolution, which George Orwell wrote the preface for. Even though Orwell was a socialist and James Burnham was a conservative, we're dealing with very early horseshoe politics, but nonetheless, Burnham argues, and this is in the 40s, he says the next totalitarianism is going to come out of liberal democracies, meaning out of our societies. In other words, we think of Nazism and communism as these really alien, foreign, other countries, other times, primitive almost, compared to us who are modern and progressive. But Burnham says, no, the totalitarianism will come out of our societies. Against like 40, I want to say like 47 or something, early 40s. And Orwell then picks that up and writes 1984 based on this insight. So I think when you combine these two things, this hunt for heretics and this the hunting coming from the state, from the people in the government, and that's exactly what we've seen. Since we spoke last time, we now know that Mark Zuckerberg sent this letter to the members of Congress, particularly to Congressman Jim Jordan, who has been very effective in documenting the abuses of power by the government. Zuckerberg in that letter says that the FBI had specifically warned him around Hunter Biden and Burisma. That's an additional detail to what he told Joe Rogan in the summer of 2022, when he told Joe Rogan that FBI had told him they had prepared him, arguably brainwashed him or programmed his staff and him to then view the Hunter Biden laptop story as something illegitimate, as Russian disinformation, as something that should be censored, which of course Facebook did. So did Twitter, which didn't just block the information, it really changed how people perceived that event. They thought there was something, as I did, thought there was something illegitimate about the laptop.
We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners. The war against free speech is in full swing. We are the vanguard, bravely fighting back. Rumble's the home of this channel, Stay Free, and a leader in defending the fundamental human right of free speech. They've joined X to sue a cartel of advertisers and ad agencies who conspire to block ad revenue from going to the platforms. Recently, they've launched Rumble Premium. This, I think, is going to be a game changer for all of us. It's an ad-free viewing experience with great perks for viewers and creators. Rumble Premium will give you the ability to dive into your favorite content on your mobile or desktop or smart TV and savor every uninterrupted second of my content. Why don't you upgrade to Rumble Premium today? Support my free speech and the free speech of other content creators on this platform. Please go to Rumble now, rumble.com/premium. And if you use the code BRAND, you'll save $10 and Rumble will be aware that our stream is creating great converts. So that's rumble.com/premium and do use the code BRAND to save $10. Anyway, there's a link there at the bottom of the screen now. We're posting it in the chat. Join up.
So what we're seeing here is in real time are people with totalitarian tendencies, I think we can call them totalitarians when they behave in those ways, undermining democracy, attacking free speech, spreading disinformation, demonizing and dehumanizing people, all motivated out of the hunt for heretics. Really, it's really out of a kind of dogmatic belief in their particular worldview and seeking to stomp out voices that don't conform. And so when you ask, why do folks like you or Matt Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald or me or people like we come with many names of people that are speaking out against abuses of power who traditionally came from the left? Well, it's because when I came of age on the left, we were all about questioning authority. We were all about divergence. We were all about being different and unique. And it was actually part of the narcissism of Gen X. So to then know that the state is actually prosecuting a war against heretical thought and that it's coming directly out of the government and that the people in it, because we sometimes go, is this organic? Is it coming from the people or is it coming from the government? It's particular people in the government who are then engaged in these kinds of activities, taking advantage of their positions in places like the FBI and CIA to engage in this kind of illegal persecution of people who think differently and have different kinds of thought. And so I think once you understand that that's actually what's going on, it does help to, I think, more quickly shine a light on their bad behavior in real time, which I think makes it much weaker. Like this, to give one final example, and I'll shut up. This recent thing where they went after Lauren Chen because she was allegedly taking money from Russia Today or from Russians. it was kind of a 2-day news story. I think a lot of people skeptical on the right were like, we just don't care or don't believe it. But it didn't really even have much traction on the left, which is why you saw Hillary Clinton in that clip you just showed, trying to say the media should be covering that even more. We should go back to the kinds of campaigning against Trump that we did in 2016 and 2020, but which was basically accusing him, of being a puppet of Russia and trying to undermine democracy.
When you appoint legitimate targets to condemn, and I suppose in extreme cases, kill, you're kind of engaging with your, persecution of heretics argument, or at least the argument you're relaying. That's an interesting psychic force that's being engaged there, because I have the tendency, Michael, to regard bureaucracies as somewhat sterile and certainly rationalist, and kind of held together under purview that's quite, ultimately rational, that it's not harnessing dark psychic energy. But when you sort of use that example, and because I've got personal experience of being a heretic and the way that arguments can be made, but what do you need to say about someone in order to hate them and condemn them? Well, here's a list of things that, if they were true of a person, would legitimize hating and killing them. What if they were a rapist? What if they were a racist? Oh, yeah, well, then you'd be okay to kill them. Well, shall we do that then? Can we create those conditions using the tools at our disposal? So there's obviously a sort of a personal aspect to it that's given me like sort of some sort of rather a visceral insight. But obviously, beyond the personal, the idea that from social democracy, tyranny will emerge is, I didn't realize that was an idea with such a long lineage, because my assumption was that Orwell's prognosis that from Soviet communism, which some people on the left in my country were pretty optimistic about until bloody 20 years ago, actually, that would come forms of totalitarianism. And what I've felt that we've been, grappling with, or at least trying to understand, was to the Fukuyama point a minute ago, is that we had ideologies that emerged from industrialization, the successes and failures of industrialization, the ability for mass industrialized warfare that from 1914, the ability for mass manufacture, the ability to have forms of colonialism and imperialism that were unimaginable prior to the technological advancements of the Second World War and even after the Second World War. But the fact that the palliatives of social democracy that's offered as the kind of panacea to the extremism of the Second World War and the Cold War, and brings about, in the victory of the West and the fall of the Berlin Wall, social democracy for everyone? ? And if you don't agree with that, we're coming to give you that democracy. And the sort of the hypocrisies that spawns, Michael, we have to get the Ukrainian democracy. We have to fight for Ukrainian democracy. One media, no elections, jailing of dissidents. This is not an attack on Ukraine or Ukrainian people, but democracy and social democracy are functionally a cult now, or if not a cult, a ideology. It's not anymore the process by which the electorate chooses how they are governed. It's not that, because if it were, you'd have referenda on migration, you'd have referenda on free speech, you'd have referenda on nationalism, which is the obvious sort of secondary beneficiary to totalitarianism, and the kind of bureaucracies we're discussing and their incredible power are either ethno-nationalist or just nationalist political movements, which is a somewhat rational response to globalism and the threats that it brings, whether it's bottom-up migration or top-down corporatism. So, yeah, I appreciate you explaining that, because social democracy has of course, presented itself as something that's almost the neutral, sensible alternative to tyranny, rather than what it perhaps is, the midwife of a tyranny that was unimaginable to your Mussolinis and your Stalins and your Pol Pots and all of the monsters of yesteryear and their killing fields and their killing games. And it's, I suppose, in a way, it's obvious that it would be augured by bureaucrats that are so bloody boring. They bore you into tyranny with their reason. So I wonder if you talk about that for a moment, as well as my earlier offering that there seems to be a sort of a dark psychic force within it because of that hunting and killing of heretics idea that you introduced.
Yeah, I think it's basically, I think we have a much better picture right now of the censorship industrial complex, what it is, where it comes from, why it exists, than we did a year ago or a year and a half ago, or a year and a few months ago when we had our conversation in London. So what you see is after World War II, the U.S. puts in place really Pax Americana, the United States policing the world. It's trying to prevent the kind of populism and nationalism that it perceived led to the fascist and then later communist regimes in Europe, but also in Japan, and arguably in China too, where you of course have Mao and really the worst atrocities of communism and totalitarianism. So you have I think you do, and for me, and obviously I'm a beneficiary, as you are and most of your listeners, of this Pax Americana of, the United States kind of keeping the world safe after a very terrible, terrible war, a war that is like apocalyptic when you really look at what it was, and particularly including the Holocaust. So naturally, over time, because this is the nature of the world, things become their opposite. And so the system put in place to prevent totalitarianism, it's Shakespearean, becomes totalitarian and becomes the main driver of totalitarianism. Now, the bureaucrats that you're talking about, I think it's important to understand these are people that have a very high sense of entitlement, a very strong sense, desire for power, and a lot of grandiosity. Those are all, for people that are listening that know their psychology, those are all characteristics of cluster B personalities. There's a very famous, or not famous enough book called Political Ponerology by a Polish psychologist who says that totalitarianism, his version, is totalitarianism is about when the psychopaths and narcissists take over institutions. And there's a lot of truth in that story too. So you and these things all fit together, right? It's these people that these bureaucrats are in these institutions. They are, if you're psychopathic, it's really about not caring about others and also being willing to take much more significant risks, such as spreading disinformation about a laptop that could hurt a presidential candidate, such as changing the intelligence reports to suggest that the Russians favored Trump when they actually favored Clinton, which actually happened. It's it's lying about vaccines. It's saying you need to do lockdowns, no matter the consequences for kids. I mean, these are behaviors of people that have a very strong sense of entitlement. Now, that entitlement, grandiosity and heartlessness or lack of compassion are also paired with genuine fear by the system of populism and nationalism. Remember, like, the whole problem with populism for the system is that populists can be majorities. Not always, but the system is absolutely terrified that populists will, and nationalists will basically come to power. And that's what the CIA has spent the entire, time since World War II trying to prevent. And so you get that with the revolution of social media, 2016, Brexit, Trump, and then 2018, Bolsonaro in Brazil, also Duterte in Philippines. And the system responds, with totalitarian measures, frankly, illegal measures, unconstitutional measures, of which censorship is, one of the worst, but also, just trying to incarcerate your political opponent, for example, on pretty flimsy grounds, and grounds that kind of everybody knows are flimsy, even if they might claim that they think that they're stronger than they are publicly. So, right, I think that our opportunity is to have this clarity about what's going on, call it out in real time when it's happening, and not just denounce it. This was the other point that the author of Ponerology makes. His name is Andrew Loboziewski, I think, if I pronounce the Polish right, but people can find it on Amazon. But the other point he makes is that you must also describe what's going on psychologically for the people that are doing this. And I'm not saying that you should just call your opponents narcissists and psychopaths, because I think people will tune that out. That just feels like rhetoric. But I do think it's appropriate to say, look, these folks are motivated on the one hand by insecurity and fear that they're going to lose power. And on the other hand, they have inappropriately high levels of entitlement to decide what we are allowed to read and write online, entitlement over breaking the rules, including and the norms, including incarcerating your political opponent or spying on people or spreading disinformation, and grandiosity, the sense in which they're entitled to do these things in order to save liberal democracy. So, of course, it's classic Shakespearean villain stuff where the people that are actually creating the totalitarianism are completely in the grip of this idea that they're heroes saving democracy from these evil, dangerous populists and nationalists.
What do you want? These are actually snacks that are available from Rumble. Rumble make these snacks, you see. This is a brand called Positive. It's a pet food brand that Rumble have. But also they have a pet insurance that is an affiliate to it. Like dogs can go from very high energy to being sick in an instant. And it's like if you have to call a vet, like when they're out of hours. It's a terrible way to manage your dog's health. Not to mention it can be very stressful for you. So there's this emergency pet kit that you can get from Positive Health, which contains critical medications and supplies that can keep you out of vets and maybe even save your dog's life. So if you want to use it, go to Positive, that's spelled like PAW, positive.com/brand. That's Positive, PAWS.com/brand, and get your pet emergency kit that's got critical meds in it like activated charcoal and styptic powder, and you can get 15% off using the code BRAND today. Go to positive.com/brand and use the code BRAND to get 15% off. I like these Rumble connected organizations because they've been so supportive. Good boy. So supportive to our channel. It's great to give a little bit back. There it is. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.